Welcome again to another episode of Sun Dragon Tips and Tricks Rebecca at Home. I'm starting off this week with a couple of apologies because I realized this morning, last week I showed you my Papillon shawl, the moth version with all the beautiful browns in it, and it hadn't been blocked yet. And I said, I'm going to block it this week and I'll show it to you next week. And I blocked it on Tuesday and it was dry on Thursday for our other show, our other channel, Sun Dragon Sideshow. And I showed it off there. And I promptly at the end of the week, because it was so busy and crazy and we were getting ready for bad weather and so many things were going on, an extra day, long day on Saturday, I forgot to bring it home. So I'm going to do my best to bring that home next week to show you all the blocked version of that. And the other apology is I had the virtual dual platform Facebook Live and Zoom 2-hour sit and stitch yesterday, and usually that means I have everything on the table to show you off all my projects and everything and anything you might be asking about. And most of that's packed up in the hallway because my brain went into let's get ready for work mode. And I packed it all up. So I pulled up back a few things to talk about some stuff today. And yeah, lost my train of thought for a second. Shocker. But I have a few things I wanted to talk about today, so I made sure that they are nearby me. Anyway, I will talk about this in a second. So, I noticed a couple of things to follow up on with either questions or comments from previous videos. If I'm not getting to your comment, I apologize. Please leave it again or let me know that there's a comment somewhere to read if you would like those addressed. So the first one was a follow-up on last week when I was talking about speed of knitting, all those kinds of things, and pilling yarn and all those kinds of things. Someone commented, I don't have the comment in front of me, so apologies if I am not getting this quite right. But they brought up the very valid point that I don't know if I addressed or not. Anyway, I don't know. They brought up a very valid point of what they find relaxing is fast knitting. And sometimes the speed, if that is what is the thing you crave, and the thing that will make you happy, by all means, go for it. And if you're doing it for enjoyment, and if that enjoyment is the pace, there's so many reasons we all love to knit and crochet. If that's the reason that it brings you happiness, then by all means, of course. If you are happier with faster knitting, then learn how to do it faster, by all means. I am always just wary of I'll be happier if I knit faster, I look better, I lose weight, and then you hit those benchmarks and you're like, but I was supposed to be happier now. It's being real with yourself. So if different things are going to make everybody feel better. And if being able to pump out a project really quickly, if that makes you feel better, that is completely valid. It's just being cautious of the not enough syndrome, which I find I fall into all the time, of feeling like you're not enough unless something else, there's always another benchmark down the road. So it's being real with yourself about that, I find. It's being real with, yes, this is what makes me happy, or getting to that point and saying, that hasn't made me happy, so figuring out what will. And honestly, sometimes that needs some therapy, and I think everyone could benefit from therapy. It's not just I have an issue, I need to go to therapy. Talking things out, coming to a better understanding of who you are, and having some help with that is very hard to uncover on your own, I have found. Getting some help with that can be enormous. And that's my soapbox for the day. I have a whole series of videos that I have called Life Lessons from Knitting and Crochet. And I think that's almost getting folded into this weekly podcasts I'm trying to do now. But some of that are realizations I've come to through therapy and seeing how it connects with my knitting and crocheting. Some of that comes from interacting with customers and seeing the connection, and all over the place. But I feel like there's a lot we can learn from everything in life. So, the other thing I wanted to address, I noticed a question just this morning about brioche tuck knitting and how someone was trying to find answers to this. And I did a little research as well, because that's a category on Ravelry, is brioche tuck. And it's in the same category with cables. So I was like, is it the same? It's not quite the same as cables. Essentially, like the person who was asking this, if you're having trouble finding videos, you may just want to search for tuck knitting instead of brioche tuck knitting. Tuck knitting is a way, I'm not as well versed in it, but I can tell you what I've uncovered. It is a way to have stitches rise over or tuck behind other stitches, especially when you're using multiple colors. It gives an added texture to it. It uses the brioche technique of, usually what happens in brioche is, say you're knitting and then you're slipping and yarning over a stitch of usually another color, but not always. And you knit a stitch, bring your yarn forward and slip and yarn over that slipped stitch. And it creates like a stitch and then a slipped yarn over, stitch, slipped yarn over. Brioche tuck is where you do that for multiple rows. So when you go around again or when you go back, I think it's done in either way. I've seen it more when things are done in the round. So you might knit, you have 2 colors, and you might knit 5 rows with color A. And every time you go around, you're going to slip color B and add a yarn over. Like you're going to slip and yarn over that same stitch 5 times. So on the first row, you have 1 yarn over. And on the second row, you knit and bring your yarn forward and slip both the slip stitch and its yarn over and pull the yarn over that. This setup doesn't give me the ability to show you with my hands what's going on. There's some very good videos out there though for this. So then that slip stitch has 2 yarn overs, and they'll often call it a slip 1 yarn over. Like there's a subscript, like a little exponent that says 1. And that means it already has a yarn over and you're giving it another one. And on the next row, it'll say slip 2 yarn over or some kind of combination of that. And that means the stitch you're slipping has 2 yarn overs and you're doing another one. And let's say there were 5. So then on the row where you resolve that, and usually you resolve a brioche stitch with color B, with the second color, and it will have a number associated with it, and that is how many yarn overs. So say it had a 5, it means that you are now brioche purling 5. You're purling the stitch with the 5 yarn overs all together into one single strand again with color B. And for anyone who hasn't done that, a lot of that either won't make sense or be very like, ooh, let me try that. But it is a way to make your stitch tuck way down. It's like the reverse version of that would be if you were going way down 5 rows to pull up that and knit that stitch. But instead of diving and tucking down, they have you using the brioche technique of, for 5 rows, you are yarning over a slip stitch every time, and then you are tucking them all back behind. So it's using a brioche technique to knit a stitch that's several rows below. I hope that helps. But like I said, if you are trying to look up a YouTube video on it, I would look up tuck knitting instead of brioche tuck knitting. It's using the brioche technique of slipping and yarning over to do a tucked stitch. So it kind of makes me, there was one thing I was searching when I was looking this up. There was a Modern Daily Knitting blog post about it. And it was to make a cowl by Nancy Marchant. And she is like the queen of brioche. And so part of me went, ooh, maybe I need to do this cowl now for a shop sample. And maybe I need to teach a class on it. And that doesn't mean I'm going to have a video yet for this channel on that. I feel like I need to take a sabbatical to bring this channel up to date with all the videos I'd like to do for you all. But it has inspired me. So thank you for that question. And I hope the verbal explanation helps, because some people are verbal learners and some people are visual learners, and everybody's got a different way of learning it. So, but yes, look up tuck knitting. You might find more results than brioche tuck knitting. So, excuse me with my allergies here. Okay, so moving on to, I don't have the beautiful blocked shawl to show you this week, but I will next week. What I did finish, and I'll get to why these are all hanging, I mean, these are hanging out because I put it on. I did finish my Staffin pullover, and I will put those little tails back behind me for a second. I did finish the knitting of this. I'm backing up so you can see the length, the sleeves. I have finished all of my knitting for this. So in many ways, I consider it a done project now. There's still a few more steps to have it look its best. And that is weaving in my ends and blocking it. So the last two things that I've blocked have been my Stonecatcher shawl and my Papillon shawl. And I hadn't woven in any of the ends on those yet. That brings me back to this. There's lots of ends. There are 9 skeins of yarn in this sweater. I thought it would take 11. It turns out the skeins all had a little bit extra weight, like grammage, and so therefore yardage potentially on them. I thought it would take 11. It didn't even take a full 9. And some of that is I made the sleeves a little shorter. I did my decreases for my size for a 50-inch-ish finished bust. I've said this many times. It was supposed to be so many decreases on the arms every 6 rows and then every 5 rows. And I just did them every 5 rows. And the cool thing about the texture on this means I knew I could make the sleeve lengths pretty much match, even if I got off on those decrease rows. Because I ended the sleeves at the same part of the pattern repeat. But the 5 rows, it turns out my arms are shorter than a lot of pattern writers assume they will be. And sometimes that's because of exponential sizing of if someone's bigger this way, that must mean they're taller. And I'm just bigger this way. Let's be honest. But I found at doing it every 5 rows, when I finished and got to the right number of stitches, it was about the right length. If it wasn't, I just would have knit more repeats of the pattern. But it was about the right length to start my cuffs. And the next thing in the order of things to do is either weaving in ends or blocking. And blocking might relax this a little bit, might make it a little bigger. In some ways that will be good. In some ways it might not. It hopefully will help where, like, when I take this off, the rib areas want to like suck in. That's why ribbing is done on the brims of hats and the cuffs of sleeves and everything like that, is it tends to hug a little more. It's got a little more stretch. So when there's a pattern that has ribbing and then other texture, when this is not on me, and even a little bit when it is on me, you kind of see it kind of go whoop in for the ribbing and then out and then in and then out. Blocking might help settle that a little bit. Might make it a little less squishy, but the drape should be nicer. So it might come out a little bit bigger. So again, when I stand up, where it's falling on, my sleeves are coming to like mid back of my hand, and the torso's kind of just basically at the crotch, So once I block this, if I'm able to do that this week, we'll see next week. Hopefully I'll bring it home. We'll see next week how it's changed, how the fit. Some people have said, you don't need to block this. It does look really nice on, but I always like to show people what happens if you do or don't block it. It could help settle some of, there's some gappiness around the faux bobbles, which I may be the only one who sees that, but I get to see if it settles those stitches a little more or not. Blocking isn't a magic cure for everything. The one difference between blocking this and the blocking, well, there's a couple differences. Blocking the shawls and blocking a sweater. The shawls I aggressively blocked. And that means I really stretched them to open up the lace and to change, to help the flow of it. That meant that they grew exponentially. I like that word today, apparently. That meant they grew a lot. And that's okay with a shawl, to open it up, to make it sing, as we say. It's okay if it gets bigger. This guy, I am not going to aggressively block. I'm not going to pull it and pin it and rawr. If anything, I like how it fits right now. So I'm going to take some measurements of this before I block it, and then soak it in water, maybe with a little wool wash, maybe not. Depends on if I remember. And then I'm going to spin it out in my washing machine on spin cycle only. So once the fibers are saturated, they don't need to be sopping wet when I lay it out to dry. Sopping wet means it might pull under its own weight, just walking it up to my blocking pads, and might really become a lot bigger. It's hard to know how different fibers are going to behave. So I'm going to spin it out in my washing machine, my top loader washing machine on spin cycle only. And that should not felt it or anything. And then I'm going to take it upstairs and lay it on my blocking mats and try to match the measurements I had. It's very possible it's going to be a little bigger, but I'm probably not going to pin it except for to keep the measurements. So if my cat decides to roll on it and dig his claws into it, it should still lay down. Sometimes what I have to do with sweaters, if they grow a little under the weight of the water, is I squish them back to the measurements I took, like the width of this piece and the length of the arms. And I will gently kind of squish them to the measurements I want. I hope it will dry into, because the fibers could spring back. They could just kind of puff up, and not, like, if you spread it out and don't measure it and just spread the whole thing out, especially if you pull on it, it may say, oh, you want me to be this big, so I will dry this big and I won't bounce back. And that can sometimes be why a swatch lied to me, or I don't want to ever use this yarn again because it grows so much. It really depends on how you treat it after you block it. And again, not a magic cure to say that if you squish it back into shape, it will take that shape. But I will sometimes squish it back to the measurements if it's spread. And then I'll try to redistribute the excess so that maybe as it dries, it will kind of, instead of leaving a hump and then it's flat in the middle. Sometimes that helps it not grow too much after blocking. But usually it just hangs better and nicer. And there's quite a few sweaters recently that I've posted pictures before and after blocking, and people liked how it looked before I blocked it. That gives you the advice of what you might want to try if you make the same sweater out of the same material, or make a sweater out of the same material. I often, even if the shape is different, it can feel nicer after it's blocked. Some things that, like the Papillon that I have to bring next week, after it's blocked, it's not as squishy. And so some of the texture may change. And if you don't like that, that's personal choice. Not everything has to be blocked. And not everything is going to be better blocked. But at that point, it is what it is. So the second thing that I'm going to do differently with this is I'm going to weave my ends in before I block it. So those ends I was just, I've got ends here. I have ends here that I just tucked in for filming. The ends, like this end, if I didn't weave this in, it's not going to change how it blocks all that much because it's part of my bind off. It's a fixed end, basically. But there are ends in this, and I'm not really sure where because it's not inside out. But there are ends in this places like there's an end here where I had to change to a new ball of yarn, and I was almost done with the hem, but not quite. But these ends, this is where it overlaps because I started a new ball of yarn. And see, I can stick my finger through there. Because when I weave these ends in, I'm going to overlap them. I'm going to take the one on this side and weave it in over here, and the one on this side and weave it in over here. And that's going to close that hole up. And if I didn't do that before I blocked it, it could block in. I mean, I still weaving the ends in would hide that hole, but the stitches may not have a chance to settle the way they should because there's looseness here before I weave my ends in. I have some spots on the underarms. I have these holes. When I weave my ends in from starting my my sleeve off of stitch holders, I find any time that you go from a stitch holder, stitches on hold, to picking up stitches. So these are picked up stitches, and these were stitches that were just left hanging for me to knit later. It's really hard not to get these holes here and here. And there's something else up here, but I think that's my increases. Okay, it's really hard not to have these holes. And some people in their patterns will say, pick up extra stitches around here so that you don't have those holes. I find that if you're not picking up stitches along a bind off edge, it's going to pull a hole somewhere else because you're picking up stitches from a weak spot. So these, when I'm sewing in the tail that was left from starting the underarm, I am going to close up those holes from the inside. And I think I have videos on that. It might have been part of my ranunculus series about how to take care of those. So these holes I'm going to sew up before I block the sweater. So again, the sweater settles into the shape it's going to have at the end. Now I could block before sewing in those ends. That's always an option. I don't know if those stitches will settle in a way that then will pucker a little. They could pucker anyway, but will pucker differently than I want them to if I weave my ends in after. Now, the reason that the shawls, I didn't weave the ends in beforehand, I didn't take the time, is all of those ends that were the dangly bits, the tails, were all at the end of rows. They were in a place where it wasn't going to leave a gaping hole in the center. If I had had to start a new ball of yarn in the middle of a row, I probably would have woven those in before I blocked it, just so the shape of it wouldn't be stretched and leaving a hole there that might look weird when I sewed it up later. So depending on the piece and where the ends are left, where the tails are, may change my decision on when I'm going to weave ends in. Now, the responsible thing to do is weave all your ends in before you block the piece. If I did that, though, the thing I would say about that is if you want to do all the things in the order that makes the most sense, weave your ends in before you block it. But what I do then, what I'll probably do on this guy, is I don't trim my ends up really close to the fabric until after I block it, because that weaving in, there's so many ways to weave in your ends, but however you weave it in, up and down and back and forth, and if the blocking could pull on that a little, just a little, and could suck so if you only wove it in a little bit and cut it really close, and then the blocking kind of tugs on it, it could unweave through a few of the things you have done to tack it down, and it's not as tacked down anymore. You give it a little space to shift in the washing, blocking process, and then trim them up. And then it's just as woven in as went before you blocked it. Now, what I have started doing with all my pieces at the shop is I'll weave my ends in, so the ends are a few inches away from each other, and I may not trim them very short, even after blocking, because I like to be able to show people, here's how many skeins of yarn I used, and here's where I wove my ends in. I like to be able to show people that process, and how if I had trimmed them, maybe you wouldn't see. So, let's see. So I have not yet blocked my Twofer tank. That would be my blocking of this week, potentially. So this one may or may not be blocked next week, but it's hard to block more than one thing a week, just between time and energy and things. And there's still a lot of ends on this guy, and a lot of the ends are right. They're not in places that are going to leave holes, but I'm going to open this up on the inside and see. Aha. Okay. Here is where I used 2 balls of yarn on this, and there's lots more than 2 or 3 ends or 4 ends, because I had to pick up and do stitches on the sides and do stitches on the top or whatever. Places where I was picking up from doing the back and then the front and the pieces out the front. But this is the one hole that might leave a gap in the front if I don't weave my ends in before blocking. It could leave, the stitches here may stretch funny instead of self-regulating. So that hole I will weave in before blocking. And because I'm doing that, I will probably weave all of them in before blocking. But that's the one I would want to hit, most definitely. And there might be a few others I want to hit too. So my Twofer tank, I hopefully will show off if this, I'm hoping it's going to relax a little. She has some advice for how to make the straps not be quite so rolly, but she's well aware that even blocking by itself may not let these straps lie flat. The thinner a piece is, sometimes the thicker a piece is, the more you might need extra texture on the sides to keep it from rolling. Either thin or thick things in stockinette, the edges want to roll. And so sometimes you have to have more material doing a non-stockinette stitch on the edges to help that lie flat. She has the recommendation when you're lying this out to block. And I tend to, like sweaters that are 2 layers thick, I tend to flip over after a few hours, keep flipping back and forth until it's totally dry. She recommends putting a towel, putting something with a little weight on top of it, to help these flatten out and stay flat, as flat as they can, because they may curl up with time and wear. A towel on top of this will make it take longer to dry. So I'm just going to have to play around with that and see what happens. I brought this guy in. This is the sweater I wore last week, so I could show you on the inside where I have woven some ends in. Here's a weaving of ends in. There's a really neat way to do it that I learned from the Knitting Guild of America when I spent like half a minute on their master's program. I did not finish even step 1, but I learned some cool stuff in starting to try to qualify for the masters. This, you can see one of the ends I didn't clip is short, but here is where I've woven, I probably right around here had the 2 ends, and I wove one this way and one that way. If you look really close, it's a little thicker on the back side, and this is the hole leaving the ends, so when I blocked it, it wouldn't pull back too much. But the same spot on the front side is right in here, and if we really look and pull, we might see it, well, you might not. So I have quite a few spots, because these were 50-gram skeins. I have quite a few spots where I wove my ends in before blocking. So that's my big thing about weaving ends in versus blocking and what to do when. Another project I'm working on right now that's not a sweater is, here's how I'm doing on my Laulu shawl. I don't remember exactly where it was last week, But now that I finished my my Staffin, which is part of the make-along, I'm going to circle back to make-alongs in a minute. It's part of my make-along for the Sun Dragon make-along for February and March. I have a class on this shawl coming up next week. The Laulu shawl, Laulu. And I am using a slow color changing mohair. You can see it's starting to get a little orange up here. It's like, woohoo. That's what I have left. And I made this bigger. I'm trying to finish it up since the class is next weekend. It's in shop. I made this bigger than the pattern calls for. The pattern really is for more of a kerchief size that probably would have turned around in here. And I tried to go to the line in the, repeating the chart that you can repeat to make bigger. You had to go up to a certain line in the chart and turn around. So by the time I got to the line in the chart where I was close to 50 grams, I was actually under 50 grams right there. Like if I hold this out, I think I did a couple more repeats of the chart. If I hold this out, this spot right here is where it starts to go back in again. And I was just under 50 grams. So I'm playing yarn chicken. I think that there might have been more than 100 grams on the whole skein, but I'll find out. But I just love, I'll try to update you. I don't know if I can finish this before the class, but I'm going to try. I do just love, this is not just a trick of the light, that it's light pink and then it goes to a darker pink. And now it's starting to shift to like a corally peachy color. So I wanted to show off what a whole skein of this would do knit up, and it is so soft. It is the Laulu du Nord Poema Cashmere, and it's mostly merino and a little bit of cashmere, and but that just makes it so soft. It's yummy, yummy, yummy. This is something else that will probably get bigger when it's blocked. And it might get a little less soft, a little less squishy, but it should still be soft if I aggressively block. It's something I would be fine with aggressively blocking, because look at that, as opposed to just having it hang naturally. The lace opens up a little when you block it. I don't have to block this. I think it's gonna look a little prettier if I do, and it'll get a little bigger if I do. And it's something that I do have one end in here. I was going to say, I don't need to weave my ends in before I block it. But I'm trying to find it now. There was a spot where the yarn broke because it was stuck in other things. And in untangling it, I think this one, no, never mind. I'm remembering another project. My Monti wrap, my lace skein that's hugely long broke because I was tugging on it trying to untangle it, and I pulled too hard. So this one, if it doesn't break the whole time I'm using it, I could block it ostensibly without weaving my ends in, because I should only have the end at each tip where I start and stop, because it's a very long ball of yarn. We'll see. But I'm very excited to be decreasing on this and having it change to a warmer tone. I think it's really fun to watch the color changes on that. While I'm on things that I have in shop classes coming up on, so March 22nd is when this guy is happening. And then March 29th is when my Monti wrap by Toni Lipsey, the patterns by Toni Lipsey, is being taught as a class. And that's the one I'm doing with fluffy yarn, and I'm holding mohair and other stuff together. I don't know if I've made a lot of progress on this since last week. So I'm really trying to finish up other stuff first, but I am loving how this came out. This is one I have some ends to weave in on. Actually a bunch of ends, because I kept changing the mohair down here, but I will keep you up to date on that. Switching to the make-alongs for a minute. I'm doing every 2 months, I'm kicking off a different sweater. It is also the thing that has options for virtual help. Coach and Connect. It's not as much help as in person, so it's not as expensive, but Coach and Connect is a time to Zoom and chat and get questions answered. There's 4 sessions for each make-along. We're done with the sessions for the Staffin. So I'm going to finish talking about the Staffin and move on to what's coming up. But before I totally move on with the Staffin, because I finished the knitting on this one, I made some more progress on my vest, the Staffin vest. I'm using, this was a mono Touré. It was gorgeous Pima cotton and merino wool blend. It's got some heft and some stitch definition and some drape to it. We have a yarn in the shop that honestly is not getting its due. So I figured I'd make a vest out of it, and one of my stitches fell off here. So it's the Merino 401 from Barocco. It is 100% merino. It's got this squishy, stretchy, feels very like a merino we had in the past, but it is not superwash. It feels superwash. It's got a little fuzz on it, which kind of lets you know it's not. It feels like superwash, but I would not put this stuff in the washing machine. I would hand wash. But I am doing the vest with this because it shouldn't take too many balls of it. With 50-gram balls, you're going to need more than when things are 100-gram balls. It's about $10 a ball. I mean, we might have it at like 11. But this is the back of the Staffin vest. It has a different construction. The pullover has the raglan sleeves with this steep angled diagonal, and the vest has a much sharper angle that is going to put this little piece at, it's pulling in a way that you can really see where I picked up stitches. I might have been able to do that cleaner, but I'm not stressed about it. It puts that angle like way at the back. Like if I try to, I needed Liz's help to like see what was going on with this when I put it on. Like that piece sticks way in the back there. It sits at a very different angle than the raglan seams because it's a vest. And so this is coming across the front right now. And there's my armhole. I'm doing the front, this little front piece, which actually is going to sit kind of on the back like that, was really fast because it's not many stitches. And then I'm almost to the point where I'm going to do it over here and get the front part of the vest. I think the vest is a much more manageable size project. There's just going to be increases on both knit and purl sides. And I found this texture pattern when doing it flat, which is for parts of the vest and the cardigan, there's a lot of purling. And we were talking with people on our Coach and Connect that for people who do Portuguese style knitting or who like purls, that's great. For people who are not fans of purling, there's extra rows of purling because the rows that seem knit on here, a lot of them you have to purl because you're on the wrong side of the work. Anyway, I'm excited about making my vest out of this. I'll let you know. Even, it's probably going to take me beyond March. There's only a couple weeks left in March, but I will keep you updated on how that goes. I mean, it's a valid point that the make-alongs, I'm doing a different one. I'm focusing on something different every 2 months. But that's not with the intention of you have to finish a sweater in 2 months. For some people, that will be no problem. And for other people, they will still be working on it months later. And that's, again, circling back to the beginning of this episode, that's totally fine. That's, you knit at the pace that you knit. It's all good. So April next month starts a new make-along, and it's the one crochet make-along we're doing this year that I'm actually very excited about because there are, but there aren't a whole lot of crochet sweater patterns. There are if you like bulky and cozy and, sorry, I'm getting a video in there, a text in there, bulky and cozy and thick pieces because crochet stitches are thicker. With the same yarn. If you knit and crocheted a sweater with the exact same yarn, you'd have a much thicker, warmer. There might be holes in it if it's in crochet, if you're doing granny square type stuff. There's a lot more options for gaps in crochet sweaters because of taller stitches, kind of, they don't sit as woven together as this, but that doesn't mean that they're colder. They're thicker stitches, so it kind of either balances out or you'll be even warmer in the crochet one. I hope to bring a crochet sweater home next week that The breeze flows through it, but it's quite cozy. So the make-along we're doing in April and May is the Granny Hexi cardigan. We're using Kelly, it's either Phelps or Phillips's pattern. I need to make sure I can find it, the right one. I'm forever saying people's last names wrong, especially. This one is very modular and very, it should have good reviews if you find it on Etsy. I had someone who said, I found what I think is the pattern, but all the reviews were kind of crummy. No, this is one, the cover photo for hers on both Ravelry and Etsy is rainbow colored with black alternating rose. And I'm using old die lots of Cascade 220. And here is, what's really cool about it is the 6-sided piece won't lay flat until you fold one of the sides. And then it magically lays flat. Mine, because I have a bigger bust, is going to have floppier sleeves. If you are not doing as girthy of a torso as me, your sleeves may end up, because it's proportional. As wide as it needs to be here is how wide the sleeves are going to be. So, and we'll come back and talk about that later. So if you're doing one for a skinnier person than me, or smaller, then the sleeves may be more tubular, maybe a little, not as bell sleeved. So that's one thing that can change as you're making it. Another thing is that you can use any yarn you want. It's written for DK, but it doesn't have a gauge on it necessarily. It's like whatever your gauge is. You can, so I might do my next one in a super bulky just to show you can. She has measurements you want to hit in terms of the width of this folded piece, making sure the width of this folded piece for my size is so big. And then the width of the joining piece of the two pieces, you're making one for each side. The width of the joining pieces for your size should be a certain measurement. And then she's got a lot of measurements to hit, which you just have to fit into whatever your gauge is, keep measuring. It's not make sure your gauge, your stitches are the right size and then follow all the rows. It's keep measuring how big your piece is getting. So I am doing my second one here, and my second one is not as big. If I fold it, it's not as big. It could be for a smaller person, or a younger person. And when it gets to be the same number of rows, it should be about the same size. So again, you can make different thicknesses using this very versatile pattern. And I had, so that's gonna be April and May. And I am still figuring out, I think I have the Coach and Connect purchase button up on my online shop for Sun Dragon Art and Fiber. And it has the dates. It's mostly the 1st and 3rd Saturdays in April, and the 1st and 3rd Saturdays in May are when we will be doing them in the evening after the shop shuts down for an hour each time. And it's $40 for the whole thing, to share progress, to ask questions about the next piece of it or where you are. And we do that for an hour every other Saturday. And that's open to as many people want to sign up. Qualifications on that is you do need to buy the pattern from the pattern writer to participate. We will not be going piece by piece. We're not going to jump over the pattern writer's work that they put in, because I think it's very, very valuable to pay them for the work that they've put in. So, and if you're local, we're going to have an in-person kickoff class that gives you reduced rates on help and the in-shop times for help on that. So that is April and May. And I'm really excited about that. And I'm really excited to try to finish it before my first one, before April and May, and make another one. Aha! So just to show you can do it with different thicknesses and things like that. We had someone who's already signed up for that. I'm going to try to email her later today saying, I see all these complicated stitches and I'm not sure I can do this. I think anyone who knows how to chain, single crochet, and double crochet, which I have videos on, free videos on my YouTube channel, And it's what I teach in my intro crochet class. If you know how to do those basic stitches, you can learn to make this cardigan. The person who wrote me said, I'm seeing front post, I'm seeing other words in here. And it's very possible the cuffs, I haven't read that far ahead, but I picked this anyway. It's very possible the cuffs, to look like knit cuffs, have things called front post or back post, double or beyond that crochet. I'm using US terminology here, by the way. I think if you know how to do a double, you can learn how to do those extra stitches. And they are, I think I have done videos on them too. But we'll have to see as we come across the pattern when that time comes, how to do that. But that's to give you a ribbed look in crochet. And I'm one of those firm believers, if you know the basics of crochet, everything else kind of builds upon that, or kind of builds upon being able to read those stitches. So you should be good to try something a little fancier. I would totally recommend still doing this, because there is not a whole lot of shaping other than knowing how to do a granny square, which we can totally walk you through. And we're expanding from a square to a hexagon. And there's not a whole lot of extra shaping in that. It's just making sure you have enough sides when you start. So I just think it's this awesomely versatile thing. It's like the ranunculus in that if you pick different yarn and a different hook that goes with it, you can have the same pattern over and over and over again, and it will look different every time, depending on if you use one color or 2 or 20 or a different thickness of yarn. It's just like, you get different cozy looks for different occasions, and I think that's really awesome. So that's April and May. June and July, I'm calling it Make Your First Sweater. It's either, if you've never tried a sweater before and you want to, you might be feeling a little intimidated by something with this much texture and instructions and short rows and other things. If you really want to try just a nice basic sweater to start out with, we're going to be focusing on the Flax Worsted by Tin Can Knits. I am knitting one with some really nice basic yarn from our shop called Encore. And I worked on it during virtual sit and stitch because it needs to get done, first of all, and it'd be nice to have one done for the class. It's a nice top-down raglan, so there's not a lot of seaming and sewing when you're done. And it's got basic instructions. Tin Can Knits has really helpful things, pictures to help you through it, drawings, diagrams. It's a free pattern. If you use their app, what I've heard, and their app is free, it will modify it for your size, so you're only following the instructions for your size. But I'm available for help through either Coach and Connect or in-person classes to help you decipher the pattern. The free pattern on Ravelry has a lot of numbers, and you just have to know which size you're picking and how to decipher that. But we're here to help you through your first attempt at a sweater. And it will be a sweater when you're done, and you will be able to wear it. I can't say it'll be the perfect size, but we're helping you have success with that. So there's a textured panel of garter running down the outside of the sleeves from the neck. You can skip that. I've had plenty of people skip that to make this their first sweater. It has options for making the collar right away or making it at the end. It has options for short rows if you want. This one had some short rows to make the front sit a little lower. I often compare that to like wearing a t-shirt. If you put a t-shirt on backwards, it's high, right? It feels weird. But if you put it on the right way, the front drops down a little bit. A lot of top-down sweaters use the short row method to do that. And you don't have to, though. If you don't want to do short rows, we have another pattern in the shop that looks really simple and easy. And it is. It's the No Frills sweater by Petite Knit. But it has short rows in it, and some people don't want to do that or don't want to tackle that when they're also tackling a sweater for the first time. So this one, you separate for sleeves, and if none of this makes sense, it will if you go through it step by step with me. And knit the torso, the body, and then go back and do the sleeves. And I finished a ball of yarn last night. So I thought I would put this on, and then I can show you a little bit, like not every sweater sits the same way, but you can see the difference between this one, that goes down. You can almost see the line here. Like if I draw a line straight across, it goes up here. There's more rows in here because of the short rows. And I'm pretty sure I decided to do this version for the shop without short rows because I wanted to do it in a cost-effective yarn for the shop, and with the barest frills on it, or no frills, like the no frills petite knit sweater, but the easiest way to make it, to show people that it is possible. We usually say an average size sweater will need maybe about 1,000 yards of number 4 worsted weight yarn. And mine's gonna take more because I'm making it to fit me, and I'm not average. I'm a little bit chunkier. But an average size sweater, say it took 1,000 yards of yarn for the flax. With this yarn, the Encore in our shop, that's about a $40 sweater, $40 to $50 worth of yarn and materials and things. Mine, not counting the needles, it's probably going to take me closer to $60, $70, maybe $80. That $80 might include the needles, but that's, at a more affordable end of what you would need for a sweater. So, there's lots of options and lots of yarns. And even the sweater I'm wearing could be made in fancier or less expensive yarns. More functional yarns, we might call them. So, okay, I was getting this off onto my barber cords. I love the silicone barber cords. Goes a lot faster than taking the stitches off one at a time. I'm tying it up right now so none of them accidentally pop off my barber cords. But just to show you, and for me to get a good feel of how long my torso is. And okay, I'll leave that tail there till I'm done so I know which side's the back. So, and my dragon ring likes to get caught on all of my knitting. So let's see how long this is. I think I've only used 2 or 3 balls of yarn right now. In fact, before I put this on, if we look at this inside out, I see a spot where I changed yarns right here. And I see one up here. So I've used 3 balls of yarn so far on this sweater. 200 yards per ball. And this is backwards now. So I've used 600 yards for my size. And the other thing about the Tin Can Knits sweater is there's so many sizes. So my sleeves are going to make this pucker a little bit. There's so many sizes you can make. But do you see how, like, they've got kid sizes too. And they tell you how much yarn you're going to need. But you see how this sits a little more, a little higher, right? It's not that it's uncomfortable because it's a little bit of a wider neck. But it sits a little higher if you don't do the short rows. If I did the short rows, it just might kick a little bit differently and sit a little bit differently. This neck, see how this neck looks wider than the one on my Staffin? The Staffin had a tighter construction. It had a folded over collar. And this is what happens if you start with the collar and just go. There's another method, and it's in the instructions for the sweater, where you would start down here under the collar and pick up the collar stitches later. It gives you a ridge here. That's actually how my Staffin did it. Like, this is inside out right now. You can see the ridge where I picked up stitches to do my collar. More structure anywhere is going to give a tighter fit. So if you don't like your collar being this loose, and it's not crazy loose, but if you wanted it to be a little tighter, then you might want to try the second option of just casting on for after the collar and picking up stitches later. If you don't want to pick up stitches and deal with that, then you start with the collar. So it's which obstacle, which thing. Do you want a looser collar? If you want the tighter collar, is a little different type of work to do when you're done. So let's see how long this is. It is obviously not long enough, but it's getting there. I am not as long as I want to be on this, but it's not going to take a whole nother skein of yarn. Say like the length of this shirt. This shirt is from a company that I like the length of it. So I may not need it to be quite that long, but to be as long as my Staffin, it probably needs to be that long. So we're talking about another good 4 or 5 inches of knitting, which means the reason this hasn't been finished yet is that's not very exciting knitting. But that does lead me to the other option for the June and July make-along. Is if it's not your first sweater, it could be I need a break sweater. It could be I want something that's not super complicated. So for the people who are more advanced, sometimes having something that's mindless is nice to have on the needles to take a break from something that is more complicated. Now, if this is your first sweater, it's not going to be completely mindless, but I think this is something that's much easier to tackle as your first sweater. And the only reason that there's stripes in mine is I am using a color changing yarn. I'm using one of those barber pole fractal spun color changing yarns that gives me these gentle stripes. You don't have to do that. Or if you want stripes, you can change colors whenever you want. But your first one out of the gate, you might just want to pick a solid color and go. I've had a lot of people use Ultra Alpaca and they love it from Barocco. There's so many different things you can do for this first sweater. So if it's your first time trying a sweater. There'll be a Coach and Connect for that as well. Looking for my ring. I don't have dates for that yet, and I don't have it up on the calendar. If you're really excited and interested in that, let me know, and I will try to get that up on our website for purchase. It is, I'm going away in July, so I have to figure out if and when, the July ones will be, or when. But if you want to reserve your spot in that now, I totally understand. Let me know, and if there's interest, I'll make sure that you can purchase it as far ahead as you want. What I find is I'm usually only about a month or so out from from getting things up on the calendar. I have things scheduled every Saturday for in-shop stuff all the way through June. I have the make-along scheduled all the way through the end of the year. But the Coach and Connect was a new addition that I'm still pegging all the dates down on, having a virtual option where I can help people. I am still figuring that out and scheduling that. So let me know if you're interested, because I definitely strike while the iron is hot. In-person classes tend to max out around 4 or 5 people. Virtual ones, we can get as big as we need to, because it's hard for me to donate as much time and attention to in-shop when the classes get too big. There's too much that happens. It takes too long. We get too distracted. For everyone to get the assistance that I feel they have paid for, right? The Coach and Connect, we have this. I used to do some lecture series. Some of the sessions might be a little more lecture series based, but we can have as many people as fit into Zoom, which is tons, and we haven't run out of room in around the table. We haven't, people can hopefully have their questions answered if it's by someone else asking the question. Yeah, I think there's a lot of flexibility with that. And because you don't get me grabbing your yarn and helping you, it's not as expensive as in class, as in shop. So I think it's a really great value at $40 for 4 sessions. And each session's an hour long, so you're basically paying $10 an hour. And we're doing them on Saturday nights from 6:30 to 7:30 U.S. Eastern Time, which I know makes it tough for some people in some time zones, but technically we can't do it in a place that's good for every time zone. We are trying to do it in a way, like a lot of our European customers, our community members would join us on the ones we did Sunday afternoon because it worked. It was like Sunday evening for them. And we just found we had to put it on a day when we were still at the shop, like add it on to our work days a little longer, but then we get time off, because that's a whole extra day of work, even if it's only an hour, because there's a lot of setup involved. But anyway, I think that's plenty for today. I will let you know how I get with this too. Apparently I am into pink right now. Imagine that. Look, it's in my hair still too. So all of these projects I've started at very different times, so that's kind of funny, because teenager me would go, what were you thinking? But, you know, tastes change. Sometimes, you know, I wouldn't have knit with this before, but I want to get all kinds of fun colors in my shop. So anyway, I'm going to sign off for today. And as I always like to say, well, before I do that, like, subscribe, all those things. Support the channel in whatever way you can. Support the shop in whatever way you can. Just watching these videos is really great for me to see that I'm reaching people and making connections. So I always like to sign off with, may your crafting be filled with joy and confidence. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.